Hello, students. Welcome to the most anticipated first class of our batch, Arjun. Today, we'll be starting with the topic Characteristics of Living Beings. It is the part one of the series. So, first video is related to the topic that is growth. So, what is growth? This is a very unique characteristic exhibited by the living organisms, especially living organisms, but as promised in the reel, we will be discussing about the growth which is visible in non-living beings also. So what is growth? Growth is one of the most conspicuous events in any living being. It is conspicuous because it is most visible in it. It is an irreversible increase expressed in parameters such as size, area, length, height, volume, cell number, etc. So these are the parameters of growth that we observe. It can be increase in size, increase in area, increase in length, increase in height, and for living beings, multicellular organisms especially, the cell number increases. That is, the number of cells increases. As the living being grows, the multicellular organism grows, the number of cells present in the organism divides and increases. It conspicuously involves increased protoplasmic material. So the cell not only multiplies in number, its volume also increases. Next, we have a few pictures depicting growth. First, you will see that there is a seedling which is germinating from a seed. So that is also growth. The plant is growing. Next, we have the picture of a child aging into a man. So there also growth is taking place. The child is increasing in height. It is emotionally growing as well as physically also growing. Since this is a topic in biology, so we will be for now focusing on the physical aspects of growth. Next, you can see the single cellular organisms, the unicellular organism dividing into multiple cells. So that is division for them. But before division, obviously, it is adding to its volumes. Huh? As we discussed in the definition, growth is also related to the increase in the protoplasmic volume. So, an unicellular organism grows in that aspect. Next, we have the features of growth. What are the features of growth? Features means the properties, the characteristics which are visible to us. The two main heads that we discuss used to discuss any particular aspect. So here, features of growth are increase in number of cells. That is very prominent in a multicellular organism. The number of cells increases and also increase in mass. That is, the weight of the organism is increasing. Growth can be divided into two types. It can be intrinsic or extrinsic. Now, what is intrinsic? You can very well understand from this term. Intrinsic. That means internal. So as I have written over here, it is already showing in the picture internal growth. Intrinsic, internal. You can associate the word intrinsic with internal. So in case of intrinsic growth, the growth is mainly internal. It is irreversible. That means you cannot revert back. You cannot reverse the process of growth once it has happened. Next is unique to living beings. Yes, intrinsic growth is unique to living beings. Why? As you grow from a child to a man, or the example of plants that we have taken from a seed to a seedling, it is germinating. The number of cells are increasing, but cells are adding not only externally but internally also. So, internal growth is unique to living beings. More about it I'll be discussing as we continue with the class. Next type of growth is extrinsic growth. You can associate extrinsic with external. Extrinsic means external growth. It may be reversible or may not be reversible. So it is both reversible or irreversible in nature. Next, it is observed in both living beings and non-living beings. So the type of growth that I was talking about that is visible in non-living objects is the extrinsic growth. So now we know that growth is visible in both in living beings and non-living beings. A little bit more about intrinsic growth, students. Okay. So intrinsic growth, as I have said, you can associate the word intrinsic with internal. Intrinsic growth means the growth which takes place inside an organism. See here, we have the example of cell wall. What happens? There are two types of cell walls visible in plants. What one is primary, another is secondary. So how is the secondary wall formed? It is formed inside the primary wall. And once it is formed, it is mostly irreversible. Okay? So intrinsic growth is irreversible. The next example that we have taken over here is the pancreas development in an embryo. So what happens when an embryo is developing? The pancreas is growing. It what we know, an embryo is developing from a single cell. So that cell divides and redivides to form the different organ by the process of cell division. So what happens? It is internally growing. And as it grows, you cannot trim off your pancreas like that. It doesn't happen like that. Once it has grown, it is irreversible. It will never happen that the pancreas is suddenly reducing in size, drastically reducing in size, not at least for an healthy individual, right? So intrinsic growth is again internal and irreversible. Next, let us discuss about extrinsic growth. Extrinsic growth is external growth and it can be reversible and irreversible as we have discussed in the properties. So first take the example of nails. We all have nails, right? We, especially women, men also sometimes, they have the tendency to, keep nails and trim it off in a different shapes as a fashion statement. So we do cut our nails. So that means the length of the nail can be changed. So extrinsic growth and hence reversible. It is not affecting the organism. Next, in case of non-living beings also, we observe extrinsic growth or external growth. See the example of sand dunes, students. These are sand dunes. What happens? As the wind blows, the sand shifts from one place to the other. So the height of the sand dunes are constantly changing. It can sometimes increase, it can sometimes decrease. So this is the example of extrinsic growth in non-living. So let's take a few questions related to the discussion that we have. Which of the following is not a defining property of living being? Now, defining property means any property which is unique to the living beings only and not visible in the non-living thing. So, mark the question, students. They are asking for a property which is not a defining property. That means it is not, that means it is not strictly visible in living beings only. It can be visible in non-living. The first option we have is growth. As we have discussed that extrinsic growth is visible in non-living beings sometimes. So that option can be availed as they have only mentioned here growth. They haven't specified whether they're talking about intrinsic growth or extrinsic growth. So growth can not be a defining property, at least by the option that we have over there. Next, we have reproduction. Yes, you haven't seen a smaller chair coming from a bigger chair or a smaller desk coming from a bigger desk. Non-living things do not reproduce. So reproduction is a defining characteristic of living beings. Next, we have metabolism. What is metabolism? In a simple way, if I have to explain, metabolism is all the constructive and sum total of all the biological processes going inside a living being. So, if I have to talk about the biological processes, that is not happening inside a non-living being. So, again, this is a defining property of living beings. Next, we have consciousness. Consciousness is the decision that a living being takes in order to whether respond to a stimuli or not. So that is consciousness. Again, it is unique to non-living beings. Again, it is unique to living beings, right? So if you leave a chair out in the heat or in the sun or in the rain, it will not shift or it will not react to the environment as such. So that is consciousness. A living being does react to the environment, does react to the stimuli if it chooses to react. So consciousness is again a defining property, hence the answer will be growth, as it is not a defining property of living being. Which of the following is not extrinsic growth? Increase in size of nails. Increase in size of nails, we have already discussed that example as it is an external growth that we observe. Next is increase in length of hair. Yes, hair also same thing. It grows, we can cut it off, so it's reversible and both irreversible and it is external to the living organism. So it is extrinsic growth. Increasing height of polar ice caps. So what happens in case of sand dunes we had explained, for the polar ice cap also same thing. As the temperature increases or decreases, the length or the height of the polar ice caps can fluctuate according to that, right? So that is also an extrinsic growth. Development of stomach in embryo. This example is quite similar to the one that we discussed. We took the example of the growth of pancreas in living beings in case of embryo. So here, development of stomach in embryo is not an example of extrinsic growth. It is internal, it is irreversible, and strictly observed in living beings. Intrinsic growth is exhibited by which of the following? Living things only, non-living things only, both living things and non-living things, none of the above. So our correct option will be living things only. As we have discussed before, intrinsic growth is observed only in living beings. It is internal and it is irreversible. That's all for the character growth in case of the living being. So let us conclude our lesson here. Please keep following us for more interesting content and hope you have enjoyed the class. Do leave your feedback in the different sections that we have and stay connected with us on the different social media handles. Thank you.